Hey y'all, my name is Prashanth Kumar, or PK, and I'm an MCAT tutor at Shemasian Academic Consulting. Today, we're going to be doing a passage walkthrough in the MCAT CARS section, one of the most challenging sections on the test. You should be taking roughly 7 minutes on this passage, but today we're going to be going more in depth so you can see exactly what's going on in my head as I tackle this section. Let's get it. All right, great. So I've gone ahead and put the passage on the left and the questions we're going through on the right. So feel free to take a moment, pause the video, and come back to us. I'll go ahead and zoom in on the passage, and you can pause right there, and then I'll zoom in on the questions right there. So feel free to take a moment, pause the video right there, and come back to us. If not, let's get right into talking strategy. For me, I like to maintain the same exact strategy regardless of whatever I'm looking at. Whatever passage, whatever section, the same strategy. Coming back to that, make sure I'm confident and I know exactly what I'm going to do when I get to the test. And so for me, this strategy looks like read the paragraph, write a quick 3 to 5 word summary, then go on to the next paragraph, do the same, and on and on and on. The reason I like to do this is that quick 3 to 5 word summary makes it so I have a check-in at the end of each paragraph. Am I able to understand exactly what's going on before I'm going on to the next paragraph? And I don't need you to focus in on details or anything at this point. I just need you to know what's the big picture understanding for the paragraph, the thesis, if you understand that. And so by doing this, I have a check-in at the end of each paragraph, and then I'll have a better understanding of the entire passage at the end, whereas oftentimes I'd be reading through an entire passage, getting to the end, realizing I didn't understand something a quarter of the way in, and that fundamentally changed my understanding of the passage, or I didn't understand it at all. And so that's my strategy, especially for CARS, being able to understand the big picture thesis of what's going on, as well as how the narrator is thinking, what his tone is. Those are very, very, very important things that we're going to come back to over and over again. And so right away, let's get into this passage. Most men, even in this comparatively free country, through mere ignorance and mistake, are so occupied with the factitious cares and superfluously coarse labors of life that his finer fruits cannot be plucked by them. Their fingers, from excessive toil, are too clumsy and tremble too much for that. He has no time to be anything but a machine. How can he remember well his ignorance, which his growth requires, who has so often to use his knowledge? We should feed and clothe him gratuitously sometimes, and recruit him with our cordials before we judge him. The finest qualities of our nature, like the bloom on fruits, can be preserved only by the most delicate handling. Yet we do not treat ourselves, nor one another, thus tenderly. So the question I always ask myself at the end of this paragraph, each paragraph, is what's happening? Like, what's the big picture understanding of what the author's talking about? And so here, I'm going to write, people toil hard, no pleasure. So basically, we're talking about how the paragraph is talking about how people are working, kind of like workhorses, and really aren't appreciating the finer things in life and getting out of this like machine. He describes it as a machine. So I'll even write machine. And so because of that, we're not able to appreciate others, appreciate nature, appreciate the people around us. And so this is something that's very, very important. So the next paragraph. Some of you, we all know, are poor, find it hard to live, are sometimes, as it were, gasping for breath. I have no doubt that some of you who read this book are unable to pay for all the dinners which you have actually eaten, or for the coats and shoes which are fast wearing or are already worn out, and have come to this page to spend borrowed or stolen time, robbing your creditors of an hour. So what's happening here? Here is talking about poor. So what are the poor doing? They're robbing by reading. And so here we have the author indicatively talking about, if you're poor, we understand you have to live, you're working, but by even reading this, you are robbing from your employer. And so in this case, he's talking about specifically one group of people. It is very evident what mean and sneaking lives many of you live, for my sight has been whetted by experience. Always on the limits, trying to get into business and trying to get out of debt. A very ancient slough. and others brass, for some of their coins were made of brass, still living and dying, and buried by this other's brass, always promising to pay tomorrow, and dying today, insolvent, seeking to curry favor, to get custom, by how many modes, only not state prison offenses, lying, flattering, voting, contracting yourselves into a nutshell of civility, or dilating into an atmosphere of thin and vaporous generosity, that you may persuade your neighbor to let you make his shoes, or his hat, or his coat, or his carriage, or import his groceries for him, making yourself sick, that you may lay up against a sick day, something to be tucked away in an old chest, or in a stocking behind the plastering, or more safely in the brick bank, no matter where, no matter how much or how little. All right, so right away, in my mind, there's so much going on there. It's a very, very dense, sort of linguistically complicated paragraph. But what's the big picture understanding? It's how we're talking about this association around debt, right? He says people, debt, business, cycle, and he's talking about the bad things that are associated with that, whether it's lying, stealing, flattering, whatever. And he's saying that the cycle of getting into debt and asking for money and then trying to repay the favors is bad, right? He's saying that's the constant cycle of life. And so this is an example of something he's talking about, of sort of this, how we work as a society, and we're going over and over again in this cycle. The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. What is called resignation is confirmed desperation. From the desperate city, you go into the desperate country and have to console yourself with bravery of minks and muskrats. A stereotype but unconscious despair is concealed even when under what are called the games and amusements of mankind. There's no play in them, for this comes after work, but is a characteristic of wisdom not to do desperate things. Okay, so another complicated passage. So you might want a paragraph. If you need to go back through it and read it, go for it. But here, all I'm talking about is the amusements of mankind with desperation, right? So here it's talking about how most people in society, right, mass of men, are in this desperate state where they're resigned into their society and their lives. And then they're even, right, but unconscious despair is concealed even under what we call the games and amusements. So there is despair even in this amusement of mankind. And so that's my main takeaway from the paragraph. Obviously, this is a complicated one. I don't really understand exactly what's going on in this paragraph, but it's fine. As long as you have an understanding of a big picture, we can come back to it if a question asks us for it. The whole ground of human life seems to some to have been gone over by their predecessors, both the heights and the valleys, and all things to have been cared for. According to Evelyn, the wise Solomon prescribed ordinances for the very distance of trees, and the Romans have decided how often you may go into your neighbor's land to gather the acorns which fall on it without trespass, and what share belongs to that neighbor. Hippocrates has even left directions on how we should cut our nails, that is, even with the ends of fingers, neither shorter nor longer. Undoubtedly, the very tedium and ennui, which presume to have exhausted the variety and the joys of life, are as old as Adam, but man's capacities have never been measured, nor are we to judge of what he can do by any precedent, so little has been tried. Whatever have been thy failures hitherto, be not afflicted, my child, for who shall assign to thee what thou hast left undone? All right, another super, super complicated paragraph. I'm not going to lie, right? These are complicated paragraphs, English that we don't really use on our day-to-day basis. But what is it talking about, right? It's talking about life driven by rules, right? He's talking about Hippocrates, cutting your nails, and how organized things are, versus sort of the things undone is how I'll call it, right? And so here it's talking about, we have these rules that are driven about specific things, but what if we didn't do that, right? What if we haven't tried all of these things since we've lived such a structured life? And so that's what he's saying right here. We have precedents, and so little has been tried not around the precedents. And again, this is a very, very complicated passage, but that's how Cars is. What I want you to do is focus on getting a big picture understanding of the paragraphs as well as you can. And by doing this sort of check-in at the end, even if it's a little longer than 3 to 5 words, you see I wasn't strict to the 3 to 5 words, you'll have a much better understanding at the end, where we have a sort of understanding of the tone of the author as well as a general structure of what's going on. And so with that, we can go right into questions. So we have right here. Okay. Question number 1. According to the first paragraph of the passage, the author implies that A, ignorance and mistake are unavoidable, B, the people in the country of discussion have a chance to enjoy finer aspects of life, C, only free countries can enjoy the finer fruits of life, D, hard work prevents all enjoyment. All right, so right away, we'll look at where we're looking, and we're looking at the first paragraph, and what is the author implying? So our first paragraph, we wrote down people toil hard, resulting in no pleasure, and that's the machine, that's like sort of system that they're in. And so here, we don't really see anything talking about ignorance or mistakes being unavoidable. So we can eliminate A immediately. B, the people in the country have a chance to enjoy finer aspects in life, right? This is something that's mentioned, right? Just because we're in the society that has toiling hard, whatever, that's what's causing the ability to miss out on the finer aspects of life. And so there's an implication there that there is an opportunity to enjoy these finer aspects of life. So we can leave B for now. C, only free countries can enjoy the finer fruits in life. So this is mentioned right here in this first line. Most men, even this comparatively free country, through mere ignorance and mistake, are also occupied with the factitious cares. So it's saying that it's not only free countries. We're looking at a free country, but it's not only. You got to always be careful about these extreme words, like only, all, every. And so we can eliminate C, because free countries as well as non-free countries, because it's talking about most men there. And then hard work prevents all enjoyment. Again, be careful with these absolute words. Hard work prevents all enjoyment. It doesn't prevent all enjoyment. It's just this system that we're talking about talks about mere ignorance and mistake causes finer fruits to not be plucked. They can be plucked, it's just not being plucked. And so we can eliminate D, and we're left with B. Again, always be careful of these absolutes. When it says all or every or always, I usually somewhat cross it out, but just always check the answer just in case. All right, on to question number 2. Okay. Suppose an individual who owns a shoemaker money for shoes, owes a shoemaker money for shoes, is currently reading the passage. The author would most likely respond by saying, A, the individual has the right to read the passage. B, the individual should be repaying the shoemaker instead of reading the passage. C, the individual should finish reading the passage and then repay the shoemaker. Or D, the individual is robbed by the shoemaker. All right, so we know that, what are we looking at? We're looking at someone who owes a shoemaker money, like owing someone. And so where are we talking about owes and debts and stuff like that? That is paragraph number 2, right? Right here. It's talking about some of you are poor, some of you are unable to pay for all the dinners which you've actually eaten, and you're robbing your creditors of hours by doing this. So in this case, we're looking at a system where if you owe something, you're robbing the person that gave you money or gave you clothes or whatever by reading this passage or reading these words. So we're looking for some answer choice that looks at that. Is it A, the individual has the right to read the passage? It doesn't really say anything about having the right to read the passage, right? The author is saying that by reading this passage, you're actually stealing from your employer. So we can eliminate A for that reason. B, the individual should be repaying the shoemaker instead of reading the passage. This is a good answer, right? The author calls the reading of this passage over repaying the shoemaker as robbery, right? We're robbing the creditor of some time. So we'll leave B for now. C, the individual should finish reading the passage and then repay the shoemaker, right? This is the opposite of what we're saying in B. If it's called robbery, we should not be continuing with the robbery. So we can eliminate C. And D, the individual is robbed by the shoemaker. Now, that's the opposite of what we're saying, right? The shoemaker is being robbed by the individual, since the shoemaker is giving money to the individual, right? So we can eliminate D, and we're left with B. So that's a great way to do process of elimination. On to question number 3. The author mentions Hippocrates in the final paragraph in order to A, serve as an example for human shortcomings, B, provide concrete instructions for self-care, C, give an example of the wide range of instructions left by predecessors, or D, contradict Evelyn's statement. All right, so we're looking at Hippocrates in the final paragraph, and that's right here. And what were we talking about in that final paragraph? Well, we were talking about sort of the rules and the structures that these authors are talking about, how society is driven by, right? He's talking about Solomon, ordinances for the very distance of trees, Hippocrates, the length of our fingernails, right? So we're talking about these strict ordering rules that in this paragraph. So what are we going to look at? Why is Hippocrates mentioned? Well, we're looking for an answer choice that discusses the rules or instructions left by Hippocrates and how that's resulted in not being free, not testing out everything in our sort of mentality. And so right away, C is looking like the best answer because we're looking at a wide range of instructions left by predecessors, and this wide range of instructions is very restrictive. So D, contradict Evelyn's statement, is wrong, right? Evelyn has a very similar mentality to Hippocrates in that Evelyn is saying, yeah, we had orders of how far apart the trees should be, just like how well cut our nails should be. B, provide concrete instructions for self-care. We're not really talking about self-care as much. Self-care is not the reason we mention Hippocrates. It's more about the instructions being stringent, right? A, serve as an example for human shortcomings. That doesn't even make sense. Human shortcomings is not why, it's not talking about human shortcomings, it's talking about more how we have so much structure resulting in a restrictive mentality and we haven't tested things out. Not necessarily why it is a shortcoming. So this is the key word, shortcomings, and it doesn't mention anything about shortcomings. Rather, it just mentions that we're not experiencing all of the joys in life. And so we can pick C as our answer, and we're good to go. On to the final question. We're 3 for 3. Let's go. In order to describe how humans should treat one another, the author uses an analogy to A, fruits, B, coats, C, shoes, or D, nails. All right, so this is one of the tougher questions you're going to see, right? You have 4 different sort of words that are somewhere in the passage, but we don't remember what they're exactly analogous to, right? We're looking for something that compares to how humans should treat one another. Analogy means like a comparison, basically. So let's look for each of these words in the passage, okay? So I remember fruits was mentioned very early on, right? The fruits, bloom on fruits were right there. Then coats was mentioned right here, right? Around the debts and making coats. The shoes were mentioned. I'm not seeing the coats and shoes, right here. And so we're mentioning shoes in that same context. And D, nails, we mentioned that earlier with cutting our nails. So the bloom on fruits, the coats and shoes, and then cutting our nails. So with that, we're looking at which one of these has to deal with how humans should treat one another. And so right away, we don't really care about coats and shoes because this is more talking about debts, right? Debts and repaying debts. And so we can eliminate coats and shoes in this case. So now we're only looking at how should treat one another, right? So we're looking at an optimistic case of how one should treat another. So let's go to our fruits line, right? The finest qualities of our nature, like the bloom on fruits, can be preserved only by the most delicate handling. Yet we do not treat ourselves nor one another thus tenderly. So exactly, if you read this line right here, we have justification for why fruits make sense. And this is always what I want you to do. If you're narrowing it down to, if you have 2 answer choices left, right? Find a line or a sentence, a phrase to justify your answer over the other answer. Because that's exactly how the test makers are thinking, right? They're gonna always need to find a piece of evidence to support a piece of answer, or else they'd get sued. And so here we have a physical piece of evidence, a line that supports how we should treat one another. So we're gonna pick fruits, and we mentioned nails, right? Nails doesn't really make sense because it's talking about how structured rules are, not necessarily how humans should treat one another. And so with that, we're 4 for 4. We crushed it. Congratulations. All right, great work, team. We crushed another MCAT CARS passage. Great job getting it done. Cars is a super challenging section just because of this, right? Some complicated questions where we have to go back to the passage and find evidence, old-fashioned English that we don't really use often, sometimes not the most interesting passages, but you did it, you got it done, so great work. If you like this video, give us a like and subscribe to our channel, and comment exactly what types of videos and walkthroughs you're looking forward to next. Additionally, check out our 528 strategy series from Vikram, super helpful videos that can help you get your score that you dream of. And finally, click the link in our bio to sign up for the MCAT question of the day so you don't miss out on any test prep before test day. Happy studying, and let's get it.